Hey everybody. Today, as part of my series on crochet styles, we're going to talk about the knife grip. This is probably the most common grip that you will see around the English-speaking crochet world. Certainly a lot of tutorials on YouTube and elsewhere, whatever, a lot of them will use knife grip. The grip itself is characterized by holding the yarn in the hook and the yarn are held in opposite hands, not in the same hand. It is an overhand grip, which means that the hand goes on top of the hook as it's being worked. There's many different kind of ways to hold it, but the most consistent thing about it is that the hand always goes on top, and it is essentially as if you're using a knife. Where you actually hold the hook can vary quite a bit, but by and large, the hand will go on top in some way, and the thumb will go here on the flat part. And if you're ever actually wondering why it is the crochet hooks have this, it's really so that you always know the orientation of the hook. This is a very basic plastic hook, but it has that flat part there just so you always know where the point is effectively. Ergonomic hooks or whatever you feel like using, they should all have exactly the same thing. And I have actually used antique hooks that are completely round, and if you're used to having that, not having it is actually quite tricky. But anyway, the knife grip. So the grip itself, always on top, hand on top, the thumb usually goes here. It does not have to go here, but it usually does. The actual motions when you're holding tension, the hook itself is doing all the work. This hand doesn't generally hold the piece or touch it at all. It literally just holds the hook and nothing else. The other elements, holding tension and holding the piece, are worked entirely with the opposite hand. You hold at the base of the stitch, base of the active stitch there, like around there-ish, and then one finger here or any finger, or sometimes none. It kind of depends on how you're feeling or how you hold tension, or even if you don't hold tension at all, you don't have to. The hook goes in, and it is always a clockwise pick, as in the hook itself can do the pick to pull through. Now, the interesting part of that motion is that it doesn't necessarily have to be the hook doing the work, especially if this hand is under, like the hand that's actually doing the work is under pressure, or if you need a break. I have seen essentially people who put the hook in and then use the other hand to do the work. It doesn't necessarily, it's obviously a one-handed technique as well, but there are some that will just throw and pull through. The actual, there's no real picking. They use a flick or whatever with the opposite hand and actually to make the stitch. But anyway, the hook goes in. If you're doing it traditionally, then the hook that picks the yarn, you always have to rotate, as in when you put it in, the hook flicks up. And you can see that I've turned it and rotated it quite a number out. Some people will do that, but that's actually just not comfortable. Like, just, you can see that as I turn, that is not a comfortable action. Like you should try to do that with your hand. So you will often find when people do this, the hook turns, as in order to actually create the sweep to pick the yarn, the hook rotates, and it rotates like towards you. And you can see there the thumb, this is why the point detection or point awareness now becomes important. So the motion like essentially comes under scoops like that. And then as it comes down, the point slides into, obviously under the stitch, into the V of the stitch in order to pull it out. And same thing again. And muscle memory certainly takes over at this point in order to form your first single crochet. Now, some points that are interesting about the knife grip is that by and large it is probably one of the faster styles that you can do. It's a good all-rounder anyway, but a lot of people do it because from a mechanical perspective, the actual motions are very efficient. You'll find that because if you can watch here, if I hold my hand back a bit, the actual distance between the yarn, the hook, and the actual creating the stitch is very low. The hook does not have to travel very far in order to actually create the stitch. Now, what you'll find is that when people do crocheting for pure speed, a lot of them, if you're doing like, especially if you see tutorials on how to crochet for speed, a lot of them will use a knife grip simply because the knife grip is just that efficient. You can get up to quite significant speeds with this, and I definitely encourage you to take a look at some videos of people doing speed crocheting. You'll find that many of them will actually use knife grip. Same is true if you're doing doubles. Now, part of the interesting thing about knife grip is that you will see people when they do for speed, and occasionally just if you want to do it without, if you're doing like crochet without looking, a number of them will use the knife grip as well, simply because having the finger here on that loop helps essentially to determine how many you've actually got on the hook. Because you can hold your finger there and you always know how many loops there are there. This is especially useful if you want to crochet without actually looking at the number of stitches, and if your muscle memory isn't quite there yet, or if you're actually visually impaired. I definitely recommend this style if someone is for example, is blind, because having that finger there and these fingers here to essentially to feel for the next stitch, that will get you a long way to actually doing crochet without needing the use of your eyes. Obviously muscle memory does take over after a point if you are sighted and if you just want to crochet quite quickly, and you'll find that just having that finger there, that does help in order to go fast with knife. Another variation that you might see is having the thumb here instead, as in instead of the thumb being here, the thumb literally just slides up to the active, essentially on top of the stitch to stabilize it, and these fingers here at the back of the hook do point detection. Essentially, they know that like when that flat piece is there, like on those fingers, then you know where the point is. But this is just essentially to help with movement of the hook, essentially sliding up and down like that instead of actually moving the whole hand. What they do instead is essentially slide the hook and pull this up and down, and it's kind of to help with a little bit with movement. It seems to be a Middle Eastern thing rather than I've seen it more than anything else. I haven't seen many people in English speaking. I haven't seen any English speaking crocheters like in Europe or America doing it. Now there are some issues with the knife grip as well. There are things that you would want to be aware of simply, like from an ergonomic perspective. The first is that like that thumb being there, there is a style that I know of where like these fingers do the movement and the thumb essentially slides up and down the hook. And that can be problematic if there's actually raised letters and everything here. And the crocheter who described it, actually, she mentioned that her thumb was getting quite sore simply because, you know, moving up and down across those raised letters or whatever all the time is actually quite, you know, it's just essentially wears the skin off your thumb. So yeah, something definitely to be aware of. If you find yourself doing that, be careful of what crochet hooks you use. You don't necessarily need to change the way that you do crochet. You just need to be aware that if that spot has stuff that can rub, then you're probably not going to have a good time. The other issue with knife, and in fairness, there are fewer issues with the knife grip than there are with many crochet styles from an ergonomic perspective. It tends to be fairly gentle on the fingers, on the hands. The rotational movement itself is very gentle because this obviously is not comfortable and everybody just does this. This quick rotation is not too extreme in any one direction, and it comes from essentially from the forearm, and that is pretty easy enough to do. It's not putting your arm under stress. It's not putting the wrist under stress. So that being part of the knife grip, it's soft and easy, and you don't do anything to extremes here. So usually when people have issues with the knife grip, it'll be in the fingers, and it's usually a case of holding on too tight or cramping up like this. People will often use ergonomic crochet hooks that literally just have a thicker, softer, rubbery handle. This one obviously doesn't have it, but it looks it looks quite a bit like this, except from here down there'll be a thick rubber handle, and a flat part there for you to put your thumb on if you need it. And when they actually wrap their fingers around, they don't obviously need to grip as tightly enough to hold it. So this is like, because this is very thin, obviously it's like a pen, it's much thinner than a knife handle itself. It means that there's less pressure on these fingers. And the shape of the hook, especially if you have a particular style or if you're doing a lot of motion with these fingers, that can put a lot of the fingers here under strain. And it's mostly just for tendons. There's no muscles in your fingers to actually be put under strain. But holding them at tension a lot or repeated movements like that can cause issues there. And people do, like they move the hook or whatever like that and move their fingers as they actually work. Personally, I don't. I keep my fingers quite basically as stationary as possible, and essentially allow the movement of my wrist to do the work with the hook, and try not to move these much at all. I do occasionally move my index finger over and to pick that, just to check for stitches if I'm not looking. I don't have to, but this is just a kind of a rule of thumb you want to be aware of. If you find that you start having pains in your fingers, take a look at where your fingers are moving as you're actually crocheting. Like, are they actually moving around? Are you making a lot of motions like that? Or are they literally just gripping on too tight? If it's too tight, you just really need to go and get some ergonomic crochet hooks. Or something with a rubber handle. You can actually buy rubber handles that would solve that issue quite quickly for you. Otherwise, knife is very simple to learn. It's actually one of the first that you can learn. If I'm ever teaching someone, the knife grip is the one that I will generally start with, simply because it's so widespread, and it's good to teach someone a style that they will be familiar with if they're looking at most of the tutorials that they see online. I think sometimes it's kind of hard to parse what's happening if someone's using a style that you're not familiar with. So that's about it, really. I would say that, like, knife grip is certainly the one you would want to try to start with your right or your left. You may find that it's not the grip for you for whatever reason. Some people just kind of can't quite get the dexterity required, or like the holding the piece and the yarn here like this, and splitting the work of the actual making a stitch that way just doesn't work for them for whatever reason, due to limited mobility in one or other hand. I still recommend that you start with knife, if anything else, simply because everyone knows it, everyone's going to recognize it, and because it is just a good all-rounder. It's efficient, it's economical with its movement. It's probably not going to cause you issues down here if you're careful, and if you're just doing these soft rotations. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been informative and you've learned something. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.